The convergence of our voices is the song of our beauty. Many voices will speak here, the song woven through diverse notes. Good morning or afternoon, wherever you are, and a very big welcome to Theatre Maker, who is an actor, writer, dramaturg, and into Indigenous performance theory, Monique Mojica. So, hello, Monique. And
Hi, Gail. Good to see you.
yeah, and I'd like to start about asking about your Indigenous roots, what they are and how they influence you as an artist.
Okay. Noedi, Noigambi, Anuga Olonadili, Olo Edidili, Ganosok Ta. So I am by birth Kuna and Rappahannock. So the Kunas are in Central America, emerging from Colombia and are still in northern Colombia and into what is now considered Panama. We live in autonomous indigenous territory referred to as Cunayala, which is a comarca of Panama, coming up to our 100 years of the Dule Revolution, which won the Kuna people autonomy from National Panama. Something's binging over here. I don't know if it's
I can't hear it.
Okay, good. And my family in Cunayala is from the community of Nargana. My grandfather left there right before the Dule Revolution. He was a seaman and he ended up in Brooklyn, New York, in the port of Brooklyn, where he met my grandmother, who was Rappahannock. And her mother had come up from Virginia immediately following the Civil War, southeastern Algonquin people. So my mother and her sisters were born and raised in Brooklyn. I was born in Manhattan and have lived primarily as an urban indigenous person and traveled across Indian country, north and south, making those global indigenous connections. And in order for my son, whose father is Haudenosaunee, to have the ability to participate in that culture, which is matrilineal, I was adopted into the Cayuga Bear clan of the Haudenosaunee at Six Nations.
Wow.
In Toronto. I have lived here longer than I have lived anywhere else in my life. I've lived here since 1983. So it's 41 years, I think.
Yes.
I've lived. This has been my home. Took me a long time to get used to here. During that time, my community has become the urban indigenous community in Toronto, and with my close ties to Six Nations and through artists that I meet across the globe that I've gone to work with on seeking out and teasing out this thing that we call indigenous performance, indigenous theater.
And how
That's
did
me.
you get your start in theatre?
I come from a theater family.
Ah.
I'm generation 3 out of 4 generations of performers. So my Kuna grandpa, during the Great Depression, had a choice of either to go on relief on social assistance and stand on the bread lines to feed his family or to play Indian. And he had other friends, other Native people who ended up in New York and were their friends who had been on the rodeo circuit or the Wild West circuit or all that performance, that area of sort of there was an Indian vaudeville circuit, right? And there's been things written about that. So he took his little family and they performed
Mhm.
as a way to survive. And out of that grew Spiderwoman Theater, which started in the mid 70s in New York, which was my aunt, my two aunts, and my mom, and my generation, my cousin and myself, and our children, her daughter, who's at La Mama in New York, and my son, who is bear witness of the hallucination. So that's four generations.
Wow, yeah, that's amazing. And Spider-Woman, what did Spider-Woman do?
What did they do? They broke down doors and ceilings, and I would say they they put Indigenous theater on the stage very literally.
Mm-hmm.
And also, although we're still fighting for it, a legitimacy to storytelling, Indigenous storytelling, the way that we understand stories to belong to our peoples and to our family and to our understanding of the world. They really put that on the map as a uh, process of working. I don't
Mm-hmm.
like the word methodology because I think it's very set, but as a process and
Mm-hmm.
also um, embodied work,
Ah, yes.
non-linear kinds of work,
Mm-hmm.
also drawing on the ways that stories are told in Indigenous cultures around the
Mm-hmm.
world. Um, and they they're still the oldest continuously functioning women's theater company in the world.
Oh, I didn't realize they were still continuing.
Mm-hmm. Yes. My mother's 98, and
Oh,
in February 24 of this year, she was still on stage.
wow, great.
So I mean, my mother put me in training from the time I was 3 years old, but it was the work that Spider Woman infused, I mean, they did a lot of touring in Europe, and then there was a time when they went very heavily into indigenous communities, both urban and reserve communities, reservation communities, and they brought that way of working and sort of breaking down the hierarchy and the mystification of hierarchy of
Mhm.
garroted playwright in their
Yes.
gilded power, working
Yes.
away at a typewriter, a computer. And what they really taught me was ensemble building and ensemble creation and
Hmm.
ensemble presentation of work.
Mm. Hmm.
So,
Yeah,
and
that's lovely. Yeah. Moving theatre forward.
well, sometimes it doesn't feel like it, but that's what I'm in it for.
Yeah.
Theater is my vehicle for my subversive desire to shift that
Mhm.
paradigm. It's my vehicle.
Yes.
It's always been my
Yes.
vehicle. And as I get older now more than ever.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly there were
Yeah.
a lot of years where you had to like hold your nose and do things that were not, that satisfying, or were not the kind of work that lights you up, gets you excited, but it's a paycheck. And the last few years, I'm not really willing to do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Not
Mm-hmm.
willing to do that anymore. And particularly as a performer, because we're so easily exploited,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
in so many ways. Actors, period, female actors in theater industry for sure, female BIPOC or IBOC actors, even more so. So there's just a
Yes.
feeling of us, yeah, nah, nah, things have to be right. And I really, the whole respect for theater and how one comports oneself in a studio setting is near sacred to me. I treat it very close to the same parameters that I would treat ceremony.
Ah,
And
yes.
when I have to go against that, it costs me. It costs me what I'm not no longer willing to pay. I'm
Mm.
paid.
Yeah. And yeah, you have described theatre as a healing art. Um, so could you maybe go into that a bit more?
Well, it isn't always, because
Oh,
sometimes you have to
no.
heal from the theater that you've been in, and that's a different thing. But I think in its at its core, and for me, when I create from the point of view of what do I most need to heal in myself, in my body, in my family, in my
Mm.
community, in my nation, and among nations. So it's my vehicle, it's my
Yeah.
tool, and I'm very interested in the ways that we connect to our bodies, to land and place. And I mean, it's healing, it's also very political. And
Yes,
I
it
think
is. Mm.
those things I can't care, So whenever you take the indigenous body and you place it back on land from which we've been forcibly removed, that's a revolutionary act. And
It
as
is.
long as we have the land, as long as there is land and water and other than human kin, the stories are not lost. The stories are there. We just have to
Mhm.
train ourselves to be as clear and sensitive conduits and receptors and transmitters of those stories.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's what I've been concentrating on,
Yes.
and the ways in which body, I've been body, land, place, and material cultures intersect. I've been looking a lot at pattern literacy and looking at indigenous literacies from which to create theater.
Mhm.
The story narratives look different in our cultures.
Mhm.
Kuna culture, it's these molas that are behind me. These textiles are our
Ah,
story, and they're women's
wow.
clothing, but they
Yes.
also have specific aesthetic principles. Kuna women are referred to as walking books. I've lived with them my entire life. Reading them was a whole exercise in literacy. So I'm interested in the many different kinds of literacies that there are in indigenous cultures, whether it's in beadwork, whether it's in weaving, whether it's in wampum belts, whether it's in petroglyphs and pictographs, you know, or in the effigy mounds, earthworks that are all across the hemisphere, that those are legible. They're
Mm-hmm.
legible. And placing your body on land to perceive another way of talking about who we are, what our original instructions were, and how we are meant to be as humans in the world, it has become my jumping off point for creating performance.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a long-term project. I'll probably be doing it the rest of my life.
Yes. And
But
mhm. You are now part of the Chocolate Woman Collective. And so this is a continuation of that work.
yeah, yeah. I I formed Chocolate Woman Collective, quite frankly, because when you apply for funding, you have to have a group of people and you have to call it something. So Chocolate Woman is the translation of Bunasiagwa, and that she is an entity, a deity. Chocolate is the most powerful medicine that Kunas have.
Ah, yes.
So that's kind of a play on words and imagery. But in the last while, what Chocolate Woman Collective and the artists that I've asked to collaborate and work with me have been doing is that investigative land-based embodied research of where else can we go? What can we
Hmm.
draw on to create indigenous dramaturgies, to
Hmm.
transpose ways in which we understand stories and narratives to be told onto the stage in a way that's other than the Eurocentric um, form and structure.
Hmm.
So that's what Chocolate Woman's about. I've been working with a variety of indigenous artists for quite a long time. I think from since 2014 or 15 with Santi Smith, who is a Mohawk choreographer and powerhouse of a dancer. I work well with people who understand the body, who
Hmm.
work with the body. I've been working with a young Cree performer and theater creator out in Alberta named Tennille Whiskeychat, and with Lindsay Delaronde, who you know, and
Yes.
you know, I'm about to go into some work with one of Santi's dancers, Montana Summers, who's Oneida, and is in the early creation process now as part of the young creators section of Native Earth Performing Arts Festival they do every year. I'll be his mentor. So I'm very excited about now that it's time for me to pass on some of this knowledge, that not that knowledge transfer. It's like, okay, I've got this bundle of knowledge. It's not going to make you famous. It's not going to get you to Stratford or Shaw. It's not going to get you to Hollywood, but who wants to know? Who's interested in something else? Who's interested in another way? And I've been working with people from that point of view. Is you want to know?
Yes.
And then it can go in many different ways. I mean, also it all depends on, it's not a, the way I've been working, there's no recipe.
Mm-hmm.
There's more like possibilities of entry points. Um, and asking very much each artist, well, how do your people tell story? And what's a process? And you can pick, the beauty of it is you can pick almost anything. You know, there's Wolostock theater creator I was working with for a while, who's a visual artist as
Mm.
well as a theater creator, Natalie Sapier, and she's working with the process of weaving an ash splint basket,
Ah.
building a canoe. How is a thunderstorm formed? You know? Then the triptych that I worked on with Santee, it's all about pottery, making pots and all the things. Again, there are so many um, principles and of not only aesthetic principles, but principles of the cosmology and identity. When you choose something like that, can go
Mm.
almost any way. And the work that I did with Lindsay when I was out there in Victoria with you all, she used she developed a performance based on the life cycle of a sturgeon.
Ah.
That was her
Mhm.
dramaturgy, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Telling the story of Sturgeon Woman Rising. And it just, it interrupts the cultural supremacy of Eurocentric literary narrative.
Mhm.
And I really like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
You're a bit of a shit disturber.
Which is very much needed in this world. And so would you like to talk about some of your previous work and ongoing work that's going to be appearing?
Oh, ask me something. What, like, what am I doing next? I'm
Yeah.
going in about 2 weeks, maybe a little over 2 weeks. I'm going to be co-teaching a course at the University of Illinois with a longtime collaborator named Brenda Farnell. And this is an interesting collaboration because what we did kind of, well, more than kind of, we did intentionally is want to blur the lines between scholar and artist.
Mm.
She is a scholar. Her area is the anthropology of human movement. She's a former dancer, but she's an academic. She's an anthropologist, and I am decidedly not academic, although I can hang in sometimes on some things. And we're teaching a course at the University of Illinois on land, body, story, and
Oh,
thinking of exciting ways that we can do that with university students. So I'm
oh
I'm
yeah.
excited about it. I mean, I can only take academia in small doses. You know, I can do a semester at a time, go in, do a hit, and come back out. But I do, I have had, I mean, I feel that in order for it to be less obstructed, working in this way to be less obstructed in in theater circles, people have to understand what it is. And I think that starts with how people are trained.
Yes.
How are people trained? So I've been going into that arena to offer another way of looking at performance, another way of looking at training, another way of looking at story and storytelling, and specifically around dramaturgy, around structures, that we might use. And hey, I'm going to be in the belly of the beast during that
Yes.
upcoming election, and it makes me kind of nervous. And I'm going to be
Yes.
on
Yeah.
land
Hmm.
where, I mean, there are no indigenous communities extant in Illinois because everybody was removed
Hmm.
or were
Hmm.
pushed out, removed, or walked to Oklahoma,
Yes. Yeah.
you know, from the Midwest, from that area. There are no communities surrounding that area. So it's also there. I don't know if you remember when all the ugly, awful, racist mascots, sports mascots were being
Yes.
changed in the US. Well, the University of Illinois was one of the last holdouts. They had to
Oh. Well, this should be an interesting time there, shouldn't it?
he's not there anymore, but there are holdouts and there were stalwart people who want him back. So
Yes.
it's also a place where oh, now I don't remember the year this was. There was a Palestinian scholar named Stephen Salaita, who's a wonderful person, and he was hired to be the director of American Indian Studies.
Mm.
And they got huge pushback from Zionist alumni, and he was unhired.
Wow.
And that effectively took down the American Indian Studies department for a number of years. So they're at an exciting place of rebuilding
Yes.
there.
And yeah, so you're going to be there at the right time.
To be there at some flashpoints, I think.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah.
some flashpoints, I assume. Packing up my cat and we're going.
Okay. Well, our time is getting close to a close. So is there anything you'd like to say before we end our session?
Well, I think that one of the big things that I would say to younger artists, you know,
Mhm.
multidisciplinary artists, is to not be afraid of what you don't know culturally, because it's been my experience is that if I go and I open myself to researching something because I need to know it for my artistic work, then the cultural information reveals itself.
Mm.
And so being afraid of not knowing and not being enough and not speaking the language and not knowing culture and not knowing even things like family lineage, right?
Mm. Mhm.
That when I say this has been my vehicle, it's been my vehicle also for cultural recuperation. There's another reword that revitalization. There's a bunch of rewords, and I can't think of the one I'm looking for, but I've been able to recover a lot of what I didn't know because I needed to know it for a show.
Yes, yes. And that's how art gets made, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Art that means something,
Yes.
and I think that now, especially now, in times of such upheaval and such war and such uncertainty, and when we're called upon to be witness to atrocity, that we have to grab onto any and all tools and vehicles and gifts and any bit of strength and power and force that we have. And for me, it's been searching out this way of telling story that has to do with land and body and ways in which the the mnemonic, the literacy, records that.
Mhm.
Recording these things on our bodies, say who we are, where we come from, what our history is, what our identity is. This is a narrative.
Yes.
These are
Okay.
narratives.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for talking about your life and your work, and it's been a real pleasure. Um, so goodbye, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did.